Hey Wargamers, welcome back. We are here in the gameplay segment for movement. So as you can see here, we are on our sweet 3D setup here. There are no hex grids available. However, I assure you all of the mechanics are identical, and we're going to show you how to take care of all that stuff on a map just like this. And we'll talk a little bit about the 2D map as well. So when you are on a 3D map, it is important to have all of the mechs mounted on these hex bases, and you can see each of these hex bases, right? They have 6 sides. It's a hexagon. Each one of these faces, to change a facing, is a 60-degree hex facing there. And so that's important, especially on a 3D map like this, to determine how far the mech should be turning, firing arcs, and all these sorts of things. So if you are playing on a 3D map like this, definitely get all of your mechs mounted on these. And even if you're playing on the 2D maps, they're excellent to make sure that the mech is, in the hex and so on and so forth, and people to understand, what's going on there. So, all right, so that said, let's talk about turning. So I mentioned that each one of these facings is a 60-degree turn. It costs 1 movement point to turn one facing. So if I wanted to turn this Clint a little bit like that, like 1 hex facing, that would cost 1 MP. If I wanted to turn a full 180 degrees, again, we'd be looking at 1, 2, 3, right? So 1, 2, 3 to turn that mech around. Now in a casual game, again, typically you're just kind of turning it. It's pretty clear, and again, the level of precision is really not that important on a 3D map. However, if you do want a specific level of precision, we have this tool here. This is nothing fancy, it's just 3 hexes glued together, but it really is an excellent way to reference exactly how far your mech can turn. So you can see the mech just sort of fits right in there. And if we did want to turn them 180 degrees, we could just flip them around like that, put them right back in, remove the tool, and there it is, a perfect 180 degrees. So if you're playing with, in a tournament or when it really does matter, it might be good to have something like that on hand, so you know exactly, again, how far you can go on these 3D terrain maps. All right, so let's talk about moving forward and backwards. Let's say this Clint wants to start moving, and let's say the Clint wants to kind of move along this ridge line and start making his way out to the city there at the edge of the map. So the Clint has a movement profile of 696. That means it can walk 6 MP. It has a run MP of 9, and then a jump MP of 6 as well. So in this scenario, let's say that we want to walk with the Clint. Remember, at the beginning of the movement phase, when you activate a mech and you decide that that's the mech you want to move with, and remember in the movement phase it does alternate back and forth based on, with the loser of initiative going first. So when you pick the mech that you want to move, you have to declare, am I walking, am I running, am I jumping, right? And you can measure and do all these things before you actually declare. But let's just say, for sake of argument, we want to walk with our Clint. We're not in a big rush. So what we can do here is we can move forward, or we could move backwards. We would take a measuring tape. Let's say we just want to kind of move them forward and then turn them. So we're going to move them forward 3 inches to there. It's important that when you measure, you're always measuring front to front. So I got the 3-inch mark lined up with the front of the base, and so when we move it forward, we're going to move the front of the base to the end of the measuring tape, right, just like that. And so we know we've moved the full 3 inches. If we move front to back, we've moved too far, and if we move back to front, we don't move far enough. So always measure either back to back or front to front. Now that that is done, let's say we want to turn our Clint 1 hex facing so they can angle along that ridge line and start making a move. So what we would do there is we would take our fancy tool, and we could just line it up with the Clint. We could turn them 160-degree hex facing, and now we've spent a total so far of 4 MP. So let's think about that. Remember, we moved 3 inches forward, so 1, 2, 3 MP. We made 1 hex facing turn. Each facing cost another MP, so now we're at a total of 4 MP. And so that leaves us with 2 remaining. Remember, we declared a walk. The Clint has a total of 6 walk MP, and so that would leave 2 left. I can place that measuring tape down, just like that, front to front, and we can just move that Clint right up like that. Perfect. All right, so now the Clint's in a nice position and its movement is over. However, we're not done. Our job's not done here because we need to mark our mech with the appropriate modifiers. This is something we like to do. It's loosely alluded to in the rule book, although we have a very different system here of marking our mech. So we have a yellow die that we use to track the attacker mod and a green die here to track the movement mod. So the attacker mod's based on the mode of movement that you selected for your mech. So the Clint walked. That means it's going to get a 1. Let's put it on this side there. It's nice and visible. It's going to get a 1 on its attacker mod. That means when it shoots, it adds 1 to its shot roll, right, to its target number. We'll talk about that in the shooting phase. The target mod is based on how far the Clint moved. Now remember, the Clint spent 6 MP, but it only moved 5 hexes forward, 5 inches forward, right? So it went 3 from the back, right? It turned and then it moved an additional 2, so 3 plus 2, that's 5. So if I look on my chart, that tells me that it's a +2 on the target mod. So we put the green die down with the 2 facing up, so we know the target mod is 2, the attacker mod is 1. That way if anybody's targeting the Clint and shooting at the Clint, they can reference this green die, they know exactly what the modifier is. And we know roughly how far that the Clint moved. 3 to 4 is a +1, a 5 to 6 is a +2, 7 to 11 is +3, so on and so forth. And remember, that's forward motion, that's not MP spent. It's an important distinction. So one other thing about forward motion, so we talked about moving backwards, right? And you cannot move backwards if you declare a run. You can only move backwards if you declare to walk. But you can move both forward and backwards in the same turn. So let's say that it's the following turn and the Clint decides that it wants to move backwards 2, turn, and then move forward 3. Okay, so it's still 6 MP, it's a totally legal move, but what do we do in terms of a modifier? Do we do a 5 because it did move sort of 5, it did do 1 turn, it moved 2 in one, 3 in the other? You don't. What you do is you take the highest in one direction. So it moved backwards 2, forwards 3. So you look at the 3, that's the largest in one single direction, and it would get a +1 target mod, right? And so it walked, and you would just place the dice, kind of like we talked about, a little green, a little yellow. It would get 1 of each in that scenario. So hopefully that makes sense. But basically when you combine forward and backward movement, you take the highest of whichever direction you went. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I've modified the terrain a little bit on our map, added a water source there, I've increased the height of the building in front of the Panther. That's about it. And again, what we're going to get into is moving into rivers, woods, up and down hills, jump jets. So let's start with jump jets. What we've got here is a Panther, and the movement profile on the Panther is 4, 6, 4. So that means that it can walk 4, run 6, or it can jump 4 hexes, or 4 inches, right? So there is a horizontal and vertical limitation to jumping. So the vertical limitation is based on your current maximum MP. So right now, the Panther has not taken any damage, none of its jump jets are destroyed, which means it can jump vertically 4 levels, because it has 4 MP. Now this building, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is a 5-level building. So if this Panther wanted to get 4 inches to the other side of the building, it could not move through this building because the building is simply too high. It also could not get on top of the building. Now, if this was a level 4 building or less, the Panther would have no problem clearing this building. So it could get up and over the building, it could land on top of the building, whatever makes sense for you. As long as you have as much MP as the level that you're clearing, you're in good shape. Now, let's assume that the Panther is 3 inches away from the building. Still does not matter because its maximum current MP is still 4. Not what's left, what's total at the beginning of the turn, what's the MP on the record sheet right now. That determines how high you can get and what levels you can clear. Speaking of levels, forests typically are level 2. You can modify that however you want per the rules. We typically play level 3 forests, but in this scenario, if the Panther wanted to jump in or over forests, you could do so, right? Same type of thing. It would clear 4 inches or 4 hexes into the forest. And that's simply how jump jets work. Very, very straightforward. Now, when it comes to heat, which we'll talk about in the end phase, in the heat phase, basically you build up 1 heat for every inch or every hex that you jump, and every MP that you expend. And so there's always a minimum cost of 3, but it's important to note in this scenario, if the Panther wants to jump to the top of the building, it is a level 4 building, but he only moved forward 1 hex or 1 inch, and so it only expends 1 MP for jumping. And in that scenario, the minimum heat rule would apply for jump jets, and it would build up 3 heat. All right, so hopefully that all makes sense to you. Next, we'll move on to rivers. So let's say our Centurion's managed to make it all the way across the board into a flanking position and needs to get across the river. So rivers typically come in 2 types, a depth 1 and a depth 2. You can get as deep as you want, depth 3, depth 4, beyond. At depth 2, the mech is completely submerged. So most of the rivers that you're going to see or encounter in a game are typically going to be depth 1, that comes up to the mech's height. So what happens is a couple of things. First of all, there's a level change involved. So when you move into the river, you immediately have to pay an MP for moving forward, another one for a level change, and then an additional MP for moving into a hex with water. So if I wanted to move my Centurion into the river, it would cost me out of the gate 3 MP. Again, 1 to move in, 1 for going down a level, assuming this is a depth 1 river, and then another one because it is a river in general, because it's water hex, right? So that would cost me 3 MP. Now, because the Centurion has a walk value of 4, there isn't much more I could do. Let's say, though, I decided to run. So I've spent 3 to get here. What will it cost me to get here? So if I want to move forward again, I'm going to need to spend 1 for moving forward, and then an additional 1 because it's a water hex. I'm already at the bottom of the river. I don't need to spend for a level change. So it would cost me 2 more MP to get across the river. To get out of the river, however, would cost, again, a level change because I'm going from depth 1, which is essentially like a level -1 if you want to think it that way, back up to level 0. So I would need to spend 2 to get out of the river. 1 for the level change, and then 1 for moving forward. Note, I do not pay the water penalty for moving out of water because you only pay the penalty of the terrain type you're moving into, not moving out of. That's an important distinction. So in order to get out of this, it would cost me 2 MP, but to move into it, it costs 3. Now, again, Centurion has 6 movement points for run. I've just spent 5. I could spend an additional 1 to turn a hex, but there's another important thing that happens. Anytime I enter a water hex, so I've entered this one, let's say, I need to make a piloting check. Now, it's a fairly easy piloting check. Don't get tripped up on this. On the modifier table, it says -1 to your piloting. Now, intuitively, you think that's a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. So, for example, if my Centurion has a piloting of 4, that means I only need to roll a 3 or better to maintain my footing. If I did fail, the mech would fall over per usual. And again, there's additional rules in the rule book. We're not going to go over it here. For falling into water, damage is reduced because you're falling in water, but the same general premise would apply. So again, every time I move in depth 1 water, I have to make that piloting roll. All right, when I move out of the river, I do not need to make that piloting roll. Only, again, when you're entering a hex or a space that has water in it. All right, next we're going to talk about forests. All right, so let's say that Centurion decides to go through the woods to get some rear shots on that Jenner there instead of crossing the river. So forests come in 2 types, light and heavy. The main difference being the amount of MP that it costs to enter and how far you can see through. And we'll talk about that in the line of sight tutorial a little bit later. But as far as movement goes, when you're playing on a 3D setup here, you just connect the perimeter of the trees to sort of create the boundary of the forest, right? So you look at the outermost trees. The relevant perimeter here is between these two trees, right? And the Centurion is about 1 hex away, 1 inch away from that perimeter. So if the Centurion wants to move into that forest, basically what needs to happen is this. It needs to declare, as usual, is it going to walk or run? So let's decide, for sake of argument, I'm going to run. I spend 1 of my MP moving right up to the edge of the forest. Now I need to move into the forest. This is light woods, so it's going to cost an additional MP. So basically, to move forward 1 full hex, it's going to cost me 2. So I've spent 1, 2, 3. Say I want to turn. Does not cost anything additional to turn in woods. Rivers, etc., there's no additional MP penalty to turn. It's only for moving forwards or backwards. So far, I've spent 1, 2, 3, 4 to turn, and then I can spend my remaining 2 to move forward another hex past this tree here. So now that gives me a total of 6 MP, and I've only moved forward, though, 3 hexes. So if we were thinking about my targeting mod and my target mod, my attacker mod would be a 2 because I ran. My target mod, though, would only be a 1 because, again, I did not move very far because my speed was reduced dramatically because of the woods. On to hills. So let's say our Clint wants to get up on this rise so it can draw line of sight to that Jenner over there. Now, because we're playing standard rules and that is a level 2 forest, the Clint, being on level 1 terrain, would be able to see over it. And so it needs to get up on that hill. Now it is about 1 inch or 1 hex away from where the slope begins. Now when you're playing on a 3D map, the way we play it is the slope doesn't count as a level change. It's once you actually achieve the flat part of the hill, right? Once you crest that level is where you would pay the MP penalty. So when you go up a level or down a level, like we talked about in rivers, that's when you spend the extra MP to move. So it would cost 1 to get forward, 2 to get to the crest of the hill, 3, 4 to get up on the hill like that. Now our Clint's up on the top of the hill. What if it wants to go down the hill? Same type of deal. Once you cross the crest, that's when you spend. So the next hex or inch that it would move off of this hill, it would need to spend an additional movement point. So again, if it wanted to go here, it would cost 5, 6. However, there is the option for reckless movement. So if the Clint decides that it needs to get especially far, it can't afford to take that movement penalty, it may opt to move recklessly down the hill. Now when you move recklessly, what happens is you must make a piloting skill roll or a PSR. So you simply roll 2 dice. In this case, I got a 6. The Clint has a piloting skill of 4, so it would not fall down the hill, and it would spend only 1 MP. It would not have to pay that penalty. All right, and then it can continue to move normally up to, its walk or run MP, depending on what you declared at the beginning of the turn. All right, so what happens if you fail a piloting skill roll? So let's say the Jenner also wants to move recklessly down this hill. Again, it's going to just spend 1 MP to get into this hex, and as soon as it declares that it's moving recklessly in this hill hex here, right, it needs to make a piloting skill roll. Now the Jenner, again, piloting skill of 4 for this mech. Let's say it rolls a 3. So the mech is immediately going to fall down. So you don't want to just knock the mech over because you lose where the mech was on the map. You can't really draw a line of sight because there's no hex flat on the board. You're not really sure what space the mech is occupying for purposes of stacking and all these other things. So what you need to do is figure out a creative way to mark the mech's location. So what we've done is we've created this tool. This is simply 3 hexes glued together, 3 plastic hexes. So we put them next to the mech. We remove the mech from the board. We place another hex down that we've spray painted red. We remove the tool, and then we know exactly where the mech was. So the next thing that happens is determining whether or not the mech warrior is going to take damage. So let's roll 2d6. You apply the same exact modifiers, and we roll a 9. So we're good. There's no damage to the mech warrior. We'll talk a little bit about mech warrior damage and blacking out and consciousness checks in the end phase, but for now, we don't have to worry about it. So the next step is rolling a single die to see which direction the mech falls. So we've rolled a 3, and if you check the falling direction table, that tells us that he fell 2 hexes to the right. Now we know the Jenner was going this way, 1, 2, so that means the Jenner is going to fall this direction. And we also know that the Jenner is going to take damage on its right side arc when it falls. And taking damage is the last step. So a mech always takes its tonnage divided by 10 when it's falling on level 0 terrain, or it's falling into the same level. If it falls like from a level 2 cliff off the level 0, there's additional modifiers and multipliers that add damage onto that fall, but for the same level fall, it is always simply your tonnage divided by 10. So the Jenner is 35 tons, which means damage would be 3.5. You round it up to 4, and so we apply 4 points of damage to a single location. In the case that your mech has more than 5 damage, let's say it's a 70-ton mech, you group the damage into clusters of 5. So in the example of the 70-ton mech, you would roll for a 5-point cluster and a 2-point cluster. But for us, we're only rolling once. We get a 7. Don't forget we fell on the right side, so if we look up a 7 on the right side hit location table, we notice that's a hit to the right torso, and so we would mark off 4 points on the Jenner's right torso. Now when you're prone, you do have the opportunity to get up, and if you fall in the movement phase and you have 2 or more movement points remaining, you can attempt to get up again. What we would want to do here is make a simple roll. There would be no modifier in this case because there's no damage to the mech. 6. So the Jenner could stand up. Now when the Jenner stands up, it can be facing in any direction it wants. So now, having reduced MP, if I want to skitter off into the woods, I could certainly change my facing. I know exactly where the hex base was, and then I could measure from there and continue my move. And that's basically how falling down works in this game. And so that's moving in a nutshell. I think we hit on everything, and thanks for watching.